Thin snow fell over a low-country marsh where the water looked darker than the sky. A police sergeant, who no longer trusted sleep, heard scratching beneath his old stilt house. Caught in the rising tide was a wounded German shepherd, silent, freezing, and still refusing to give up. But after the rescue, the dog kept listening to something no one else wanted to hear. Engines ran at the wrong hour, water moved the wrong way, and old families were being told their land was already lost. To save the marsh, one man had to stop fighting like a soldier and start proving the truth one careful note at a time. Share your own touching animal story with us, and please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Snow almost never knew what to do with the Lowcountry. It did not fall with the confidence it had in the mountains, nor did it bury the world the way it did farther north. Here, on the South Carolina coast, it arrived carefully, almost apologetically, dusting the marsh grass, the tin roofs, the leaning docks, and the old shrimp boats with a pale brightness that seemed too soft for the place. The black water beneath it did not change. It held its color under the morning cold, dark as poured ink, moving under the stilt houses with a slow patience that made every sound above it feel temporary. Before dawn, Sergeant Soren Isaiah Blackwood stood barefoot in his grandfather's kitchen and listened. The house was still, not silent. A house on pilings was never silent. It clicked, breathed, shifted, answered the tide through its beams. Wind slid under the floorboards. A loose strip of tin tapped somewhere near the back steps. Far down the canal, an engine turned over once, coughed, and settled into a low mechanical growl. Soren's hand closed around the edge of the table. For 1 second, the kitchen left him. The old white cabinets, the rust-stained sink, the stove with its blue pilot light, the framed photograph of his grandfather holding a net full of shrimp. All of it thinned until only the sound remained. An engine under stress, metal vibration, water nearby. Men moving too fast in darkness. His breath stopped halfway in his chest. Then the house gave a familiar groan beneath him, wood against wood, and the present returned in pieces. Tin roof, cold floor, canal wind. South Carolina, not overseas. Home, though the word still did not always fit him. Soren opened his fingers one at a time and looked down at the tabletop. His palm had left a damp print on the worn wood. He hated that, not the fear itself. Fear had uses. Fear kept men alive when pride made fools of them. What he hated was the way his body kept answering questions no one had asked. He crossed the room and checked the front latch, then the side window, then the back door, then the narrow storage space beneath the kitchen stairs. He knew the sequence was unnecessary. He knew because Lieutenant Jessa Wren had made him say it out loud during one of their uncomfortable conversations at the station. Knowing it's unnecessary doesn't stop your hand from reaching, she had told him. She had not said it cruelly. That was why it stayed with him. Outside, a thin skin of snow clung to the porch rail. Beyond it, the canal moved between rows of stilt houses. Some lived in, some shuttered, some already tagged with bright development notices that looked obscene against old wood. Blackwood Marsh had once been a place where people repaired nets on porches and argued about tides like other towns argued about football. Now half the docks leaned empty. A few had real estate signs posted near the road, their plastic corners rattling in the wind. Soren's grandfather would have hated those signs. Elijah Blackwood had been a shrimp fisherman with a laugh like a church bell and hands that could mend a torn net faster than most men could fold a shirt. He had built this house high enough to respect the water and low enough to remember it was a neighbor, not an enemy. He had taught Soren that a man did not own marshland the way he owned a truck or a watch. A man belonged to it for a while, paid attention, fixed what broke, and left proof that he had stood there. The proof was getting harder to see. Soren pulled on wool socks, dark work pants, a charcoal Henley, and the old Navy waterproof jacket he kept by the door. His police uniform hung clean in the bedroom closet, pressed and ready. But he was not on full duty this week. Modified assignment, the paperwork called it. Sleep recovery and administrative review. Words gentle enough to bruise. The engine down the canal revved again. Soren stopped with one boot in his hand. This time he counted. 4 in, hold, 6 out. The therapist had said the breath mattered because the body believed repetition before it believed reason. Soren had not liked the sentence, but he used it anyway. 4 in, hold, 6 out. When his hand steadied, he finished tying his boots. He was pouring coffee into a chipped mug when he heard the sound. At first, he thought it was the loose tin again, a faint scrape under the porch. Then another, not metal, not wind, something lower, weaker, dragged across wood. Soren set the mug down without drinking. He stood still and let the house speak around the noise. Wind, water, the engine farther off, rope tapping against a piling. There, a scratch, then a pause. He took the flashlight from the counter and stepped out onto the porch. Cold met him sharply enough to narrow his eyes. Snowflakes moved sideways through the beam of the porch light. The tide was higher than it should have been for that hour, licking at the lower steps and pushing scraps of marsh grass against the pilings. The sound came again from beneath the dock. Soren moved down the steps slowly. The boards were slick, and the canal below looked colder than the air. A raft of storm trash had collected near the old support posts. Reeds, plastic rope, broken floats, and a mess of drift netting carried in by the night tide. Then something inside the net lifted its head. Two amber-brown eyes looked up at him through the frozen tangle. For a moment, Soren did not move. A German shepherd lay half submerged between the pilings, caught in the netting at the chest and front legs. The dog's coat was dark, black and smoke gray along the back, with muddy brown showing through the legs where the water had not hidden it. Frost clung to the muzzle. One ear stood upright. The other had a small tear along the edge and bent slightly as the dog trembled. The animal did not bark. That unsettled Soren more than panic would have. A dog that still had strength might bark, fight, snap, demand the world answer. This one only watched him with a terrible kind of control, as if noise had already failed and dignity was all that remained. "Easy," Soren said. His voice sounded rough in the cold. The dog blinked once. Soren looked at the water, the net, the angle of the pilings. Going in fast would make everything worse. The tide was pressing the net tight. If he pulled too hard, he could injure the dog or drag both of them into the deeper channel. He went back up the steps, grabbed a coil of line from the porch hook, a pair of gloves, and the folding rescue knife he kept in a drawer near the door. He tied the line around his waist and fixed the other end to the porch post. Elijah had set by hand decades earlier. Before climbing down, he touched that post with 2 fingers. It was an old habit, not prayer exactly, more like asking the dead to keep their work steady. The dog watched every movement. "I'm not coming fast," Soren told it. "You get to see me the whole time." He lowered himself to the narrow crossbeam beneath the dock. The wood was slick, and cold water splashed his boots. The smell rose around him: salt, mud, old rope, diesel, winter rot. The net had twisted around the dog's left foreleg and shoulder, not placed like a trap, but tightened by the tide until accident had become cruelty. When Soren opened the knife, the dog's lips lifted. He stopped. "Fair," he said softly. He set the blade flat against his gloved palm so the dog could see it, then placed it against the net instead of reaching for the animal. The first strand resisted. Ice had stiffened it into something like wire. He sawed carefully, keeping his body between the dog and the deeper pull of the current. The dog shuddered. Not from anger, from exhaustion, from cold, from the shame of needing help and not knowing whether help could be trusted. Soren understood that more than he wanted to. The work took longer than it should have. His fingers numbed inside the gloves. Twice the tide shifted the net and forced him to pause. Once the dog jerked when the pressure changed and knocked its muzzle against his wrist. Soren did not scold it. He simply waited until the animal's breathing steadied. "One cut," he murmured. Then the next. That was how he had survived more things than he cared to name. By the time the last strand came loose, the dog tried to stand and failed. Soren caught the animal against his chest. It stiffened at once. Every muscle braced for betrayal. "I know," he said. The words left him before he could decide whether they were meant for the dog or himself. He climbed back slowly, one arm locked under the dog's body, the other gripping the rail. His shoulder struck a beam hard enough to send pain down his side, but he kept moving. At the top, he rolled onto the dock boards with the dog held against him and lay there for a breath, both of them shaking, snow touching his face and melting into his eyelashes. No one saw him carry the dog inside. That seemed right to Soren. The best things he had ever done had rarely needed witnesses, and the worst things in his life had come with reports. He laid the dog on towels near the oil stove, not too close. Heat could hurt if it came too quickly. He filled a bowl with lukewarm water and set it within reach. The dog's eyes tracked him from the towel, wary and dark with exhaustion. "You don't have to like me," Soren said. "Just stay alive long enough to make up your mind." The dog did not drink for several minutes. Soren sat on the floor across from it, back against the cabinets, leaving space between them. He noticed then how quiet the house felt with another living thing inside it. Not peaceful, not yet, but altered. The emptiness had edges now. At last, the dog lifted its head and touched the water once with its tongue. Soren looked away. He did not know whether dogs understood privacy, but he understood the mercy of not being watched while accepting help. By mid-morning, the snow had thinned to a glittering dust on the porch rail. Soren had found an old blanket, cut away a few remaining strands of net, and wrapped the dog's front leg loosely where the skin looked rubbed raw. The animal had stopped shaking so hard, though it still flinched when the wind pushed against the back door. Soren stood over the sink, rinsing mud from his hands, when tires crunched in the shell driveway. He looked out through the kitchen window. A black SUV sat near the road, too clean for the Marsh. Beside it stood Nash Rutledge in a charcoal wool coat, dark turtleneck, and leather gloves that had never known honest rope. A younger man in a bright surveyor vest stood behind him with a tripod case, and the careful posture of someone paid not to ask why people hated seeing him arrive. Soren dried his hands slowly. He stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him before the dog could try to move. Nash smiled as if they were meeting at a fundraiser. "Sergeant Blackwood," he called. "Cold morning to be stubborn." Soren came down 2 steps and stopped there. "Private drive." "Of course." Nash lifted both gloved hands in polite surrender. "We're not here to intrude, just confirming boundary points for the revised marina access proposal. The county has a public hearing coming, and everyone benefits when the facts are tidy." The surveyor looked down at his boots. Soren looked past Nash to the canal, where the tide still sat too high against the steps. "You can confirm from the road," he said. Nash's smile remained, but something behind it cooled. He looked at the house, at the patched porch, at the old shrimp bell hanging near the door, its brass gone green at the edges. "You know," Nash said, "I admire family attachment. I really do. But there comes a point when sentiment starts costing a man more than it gives him." Soren said nothing. Nash took that as permission. "This whole strip is changing. Insurance knows it. Banks know it. Half your neighbors know it, even if they don't like saying it out loud. You're clinging to mud and old lumber because somebody told you it meant honor." He tilted his head, voice softening into something uglier than anger. "But some places don't get saved, Sergeant. Some places just keep tired men trapped." Behind Soren, inside the house, claws scraped once against the kitchen floor. He turned slightly. The German shepherd had pushed itself up. The blanket slid from its shoulders. It stood unsteadily in the doorway, legs trembling, head low, amber eyes fixed on Nash. Soren reached back, not touching, just ready. The dog took one slow step forward, until its body stood between Soren and the man in the clean coat. It did not bark, it did not growl. It simply stood there, shaking from cold and weakness, refusing to move. For the first time that morning, Nash Rutledge had no polished sentence ready. The surveyor shifted his weight and looked away. Soren felt something move inside his chest. Not triumph, not even comfort. Something smaller and more dangerous. Recognition. He had spent years believing he was the only one in the house still keeping watch. Nash recovered with a thin laugh. "Looks like you found yourself a problem." Soren looked down at the dog, at the torn ear, the wet coat, the stubborn set of its trembling legs. "No," he said. "I found Tide." The name came out before he had planned it. The dog's ear twitched at the sound. Nash's smile faded by a fraction. Soren opened the door wider and guided the dog back inside without taking his eyes off the driveway. Then he stepped in after it and closed the door. Outside, thin snow kept falling on the black canal, on the empty docks, on the survey flags bright against the marsh grass. Inside, the old house smelled of wet fur, oil heat, salt, and smoke from the stove. Soren knelt beside the German shepherd and placed the water bowl closer. The dog watched him for a long moment, still deciding. "That's all right," he said quietly. "Take your time." Beyond the walls, the tide pressed against the pilings. The engine down the canal faded. The house shifted in the wind and held. For the first time in a long while, Soren did not check the windows again. For the next 3 days, the German shepherd lived in the corner of Soren Blackwood's kitchen and treated kindness like a weather pattern that might change without warning. Soren did not crowd him. He set food down and turned away. He pushed the water bowl close enough to reach, but not close enough to trap. He kept the oil stove low and steady, not roaring, because loud heat seemed to bother the dog almost as much as cold. When the back door rattled in the wind, the dog lifted his head and stared at it until Soren walked over, checked the latch, and wedged a folded strip of cardboard into the loose frame. "Bad door," Soren said. "Not bad news." The dog watched him with amber-brown eyes. One ear upright and the torn one tipped slightly outward. The first time Soren said the name Tide again, the dog did not respond. The second time, one ear moved. By the third, Soren had the strange feeling that the dog had not accepted the name so much as allowed it to remain in the room. That was enough. The house changed around Tide in small ways. Soren fixed a cabinet hinge that had clicked for months. He moved an old stack of crab traps out of the mudroom after Tide refused to pass them. He laid a faded runner across the kitchen floor so the dog's paws would not slip on the boards. None of these things felt sentimental if he did them one at a time. Together, they made the house less like a place where a man waited out his own life. On the fourth morning, Tide ate while Soren was still standing near the sink. Soren pretended not to notice. Outside, the rare snow had begun to melt into bright drops along the porch rail. The marsh looked washed and sharpened. Frost clung to the Spartina grass. The roofs of the old stilt houses gave off slow drips. Across the canal, a blue tarp sagged over a shrimp boat that had not moved in 2 seasons. Smoke rose from 3 chimneys, thin and stubborn. Downstream, where the canal widened toward the county service road, bright orange survey flags cut through the muted winter like fresh wounds. Harbor Light Marina Partners had been busy. Their signs had appeared first, clean white boards with blue lettering, promising renewal, access, resilience, prosperity. Then came the trucks, the temporary fencing, the men in reflective vests, and the polite notices mailed in thick envelopes. Now their equipment sat near the north drainage gate, too new and too clean for a place where every honest tool eventually learned rust. Soren stood on the porch with his coffee cooling in his hand. Tide limped to the doorway behind him. "Not far," Soren said. "Doc would say no far." There was no doctor yet, not officially. Soren had spoken by phone with a retired veterinarian from 2 roads over, and the woman had given instructions sharp enough to count as a house call. Warmth, rest, small meals, watch for swelling, no heroic nonsense. Soren had been accused of heroic nonsense before. He clipped a temporary black collar around Tide's neck, slow enough for the dog to see every movement. Tide tensed, but did not pull away. The leash came next. The dog looked offended by the idea, as if being saved had not included being managed. "Same," Soren muttered. They moved down the porch steps together. The morning was cold enough to make Soren's eyes water. Tide walked carefully, favoring the leg that had been caught deepest in the net, but his head was up. He smelled the railing, the steps, the mud line left by the last high water. At the edge of the dock, he paused and looked down into the black canal. Soren let the leash stay loose. No hurry. Tide did not look at him, but the dog's breathing slowed. They passed the empty slip where Soren's grandfather's last shrimp boat had once been tied. The boat had been sold before Soren came back from his final deployment, though no one in the family had ever said sold. They said let go, as if the words were kinder. Soren still remembered the bell Elijah used to ring before leaving before dawn, a small brass thing gone green now, hanging beside the house door because Soren could not bring himself to polish it or put it away. A woman's voice cut across the canal. "That dog yours now, or are you two still negotiating?" Soren looked up. Rosalind Cobb stood on the neighboring dock, with a sack of oyster shells balanced against one hip. She was 68, short and solid, with silver curls tucked under a red-head scarf and eyes that could read weather, lies, and foolish men from across moving water. Her brown quilted coat had seen better decades. Her rubber boots were white with dried salt. She had once run a shrimp boat with her husband, and then alone after he passed, and no one who knew the marsh mistook her softness for weakness. "Temporary," Soren called. Rosalind snorted. "Men say temporary when they're already attached, but still hoping nobody notices." Tide watched her without alarm. That surprised Soren. The dog had flinched at a falling spoon that morning, but Rosalind's voice seemed to pass over him like familiar weather. She crossed the narrow plank bridge between docks without asking permission and stopped several feet away. She did not crouch. She did not reach. She only looked at Tide, the way old boat people looked at an injured engine, with pity hidden beneath respect. "Poor thing," she said. "Water had no business with you." Tide's torn ear twitched. Rosalind shifted her gaze to Soren. "And that water was high too early yesterday." Soren said nothing. "That wasn't a question," she added. He looked toward the north gate. "You noticed. I have eyes and knees that tell me when the damp comes wrong." She pointed with her chin toward the old steps along his dock. "See that mud line? Tide shouldn't have kissed that board till nearly 10. It was there before 7. Soren had seen the same thing. Seeing it alone had made it feel like suspicion. Hearing Rosalind say it made it heavier. A low engine started in the distance, not a boat engine. Tide changed before Soren understood why. The dog's body went still, his head lowered. The leash tightened, not with panic, but with purpose. He turned toward the north drainage gate where a square concrete structure sat half hidden behind reeds and cypress knees. The engine settled into a steady mechanical pulse. Tide pulled once. Soren held him gently. "Easy." Rosalind's face lost its humor. "Pump," she said. "County? Used to be." Her mouth tightened. "Now everybody calls it county when it breaks, and harbor light when it gets praised." The pump continued, too smooth, too steady, a man-made heartbeat pushing through the cold air. Along the bank, the water near the reeds began to curl in a direction Soren did not like. It moved against the natural draw of the outgoing tide, folding back on itself in dark little seams. Tide stepped forward until his front paws touched the wet edge of the dock. He stared at the water, not barking, not lunging, only locked onto the sound and the strange motion beneath it. Something in Soren's chest answered that stillness. Not memory this time. Recognition. For years, people had told him his body heard danger where none existed. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes his pulse ran ahead of the world. But Tide was not reacting to ghosts inside Soren's head. The dog was reacting to something outside them both. Rosalind came to stand beside him. "Your granddaddy used to say water don't lie," she said quietly. "People do. Paper does. Men with clean shoes surely do. But water tells on whatever moves it." The pump ran for another minute, then stopped. The silence afterward felt staged. Tide remained tense long after the sound died, eyes fixed on the reeds as if waiting for the world to confess. Soren looked down at the dog. "What did they do to you?" Tide gave no answer. He only leaned barely into Soren's leg. That slight pressure did more than any spoken comfort could have done. Soren did not step back from it. He let the dog stand there, and for once he did not resent being needed by something that could not explain itself. By noon, the mail truck had come and gone, leaving tire tracks through melting snow, and a thick envelope in Soren's box. The Harbor Light logo sat in the upper corner. Soren opened it at the kitchen table while Tide slept near the stove, and the house ticked with thawing wood. The letter was printed on expensive paper and written in the language of courtesy. It praised his family's long connection to the marsh. It acknowledged the emotional difficulty of transition. It mentioned recent environmental assessments, flood recurrence, rising insurance pressure, and the chance to accept a favorable offer before county designations changed. A second document lay beneath it, a property evaluation summary. Blackwood parcel, repeated inundation risk, long-term residential viability poor. Soren read the sentence 3 times. The words did not raise their voice. They did not need to. They sat on the page wearing the calm mask of fact. He stood and walked to the porch. The lower steps were still marked with mud from the morning's wrong water. Beyond the canal, a Harbor Light truck moved slowly along the service road. Its tires made no sound from this distance. The survey flags fluttered where his grandfather had once tied crab pots to dry. Soren folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. His first instinct was to drive to the Harbor Light trailer, put the paper on Nash Rutledge's clean desk, and ask him what kind of man needed a flood to make a bargain look fair. His second instinct was worse. He did neither. Instead, he called Lieutenant Jessa Wren. She answered on the third ring, voice clipped, already moving. "Blackwood, you busy?" "Always." "Say what you mean." That was Jessa. 48, sharp-eyed, with a bob of chestnut hair going silver at the ends, and a command voice that could quiet a room without becoming loud. She had supervised Soren long enough to know his silences had different weights. She could tell the difference between him thinking, him withdrawing, and him standing too close to a bad decision. "I got a property letter from Harbor Light," he said. "They're using flood reports to push the sale." "That's civil. The water came in wrong this morning." A pause. "Soren." He hated the softness in her voice more than he would have hated doubt. "I'm not guessing because I had a bad night," he said. "I didn't say you were. You were preparing to. I was preparing to keep you employed." Paper shifted on her end. "Listen to me. You have a personal stake. You have medical leave on record. You have a developer who would love nothing more than to make this about an unstable officer harassing a lawful project." Soren looked at Tide. The dog had lifted his head when Jessa's voice came through the phone, but he did not rise. "So I do nothing." "No," Jessa said. "You do nothing stupid. Big difference." He almost smiled despite himself. She continued, "You don't flash a badge. You don't question contractors as police. You don't enter county equipment areas. You don't threaten anybody with an investigation you're not assigned to. You keep your hands clean, or whatever is happening disappears under your own mistake." The words landed hard because they were true. "What can I do?" he asked. "Be a citizen. Take notes. Public places only. Dates, times, photos from your own property, watermarks, weather, names of anyone who volunteers information, and talk to someone who knows land law before you start swinging at shadows." Soren looked at the Harbor Light envelope on the table. Jessa lowered her voice. "I know what that house means." "No, you don't." "No," she said, "I don't. But I know what it means when a man looks steadier at work than he does in his own kitchen. Don't give them the version of you they're hoping for." After the call ended, Soren stayed still with the phone in his hand. Tide rose and crossed the kitchen, slow but determined. He stopped beside Soren's chair and nudged the Harbor Light envelope with his nose. Not an alert, not a sign. Just a dog-smelling paper that had come into the house carrying another man's intentions. Soren picked up the envelope before Tide could chew it. "Don't," he said. "That might be evidence someday." The word felt strange. Evidence, not anger, not instinct, not the old heat in his ribs. Evidence. That afternoon, Soren drove to a marine supply store 2 towns over because he did not want anyone in Blackwood Marsh watching what he bought. He came back with a small waterproof notebook, a pack of pencils, a tide chart, and a cheap measuring stick meant for dock pilings. He installed the stick on the lower step before sunset. The cold had softened, and the last of the snow dripped from the roof in a steady rhythm. Tide sat on the porch, wrapped in an old towel, watching him work with grave suspicion. Soren wrote on the first page of the notebook. December 12. North pump audible approximately 7:18 a.m. Waterline reached third lower step before expected high tide. Tide reacted to pump sound and reverse current near North Reeds. Witness, Rosalind Cobb. He stopped, pencil hovering. Then he added one more line. "Do not assume, record." The light faded over the marsh, turning the water from black to pewter. Far away, another engine started and stopped. Tide lifted his head, but this time Soren did not move toward the sound. He looked at the notebook instead. For most of his life, he had trusted readiness. A locked door, a clear line of sight, a hand close to the right tool. But the thing pressing against Blackwood Marsh did not need to come through a door. It came through forms, assessments, maintenance schedules, polite letters, and water moving at the wrong hour. Soren closed the notebook and rested his palm over the cover. Inside the house, tide settled by the stove. Outside, the tide turned exactly when the chart said it should. For the first time that day, Soren believed the water more than the paper. By the end of that week, Soren Blackwood had 23 entries in the waterproof notebook and no idea what any of them could prove. He had times, watermarks, pump sounds, wind direction, and one note about tide, refusing to leave the porch when the north gate ran before sunrise. He had 3 photographs of mud lines on his lower steps, and 2 more of water curling the wrong way around Cypress knees. He had Rosalind Cobb's name written twice under witness, though she had warned him not to make her sound official. "I'm old, not evidence," she had said, but she had not told him to stop. The harder part came when Soren began knocking on doors. Blackwood Marsh had never been a neighborhood built for strangers. Houses sat apart on pilings and patience. People knew who had a bad roof, who owed money on an engine, who still cooked okra the way their grandmother did, who needed help after a storm but would rather lose a porch board than ask too loudly. Privacy was not coldness here. It was how pride survived poverty. Still, doors closed, not all of them. A few opened a crack. An older man in a knit cap told Soren he remembered Elijah Blackwood, and then said he did not remember anything else. A woman with flour on her hands listened through the screen, eyes fixed on Tide, and whispered that she had children coming home for the weekend, and did not want trouble. One retired crabber looked at Soren's notebook and said, "Paper didn't save us last time," before shutting the door gently, as if manners could soften refusal. Tide walked beside Soren in the gray morning, leaner than a healthy dog should be, but stronger than he had been. The black temporary collar sat loose around his neck. He did not pull toward people. He did not beg for attention. He seemed to understand that every porch had its own weather. At the fourth house, no one answered, though Soren could see movement behind a curtain. At the fifth, a woman called through the door, "Tell that lawyer lady I already signed. I can't unsign hungry." Soren wrote nothing after that one. He stood on the dock with the pencil in his hand and felt the old heat rise behind his ribs. It was not aimed at her. That made it harder to place. He wanted a clean enemy, a door with Nash Rutledge's name on it, a problem that could be handled by force of will and enough truth. Instead, every plank beneath his boots reminded him that pressure rarely looked dramatic while it was happening. It looked like bills. It looked like mold. It looked like a son needing medicine, a roof needing repair, a bank officer shaking his head across a desk. Tide leaned lightly against his leg. Soren looked down. "You getting tired?" The dog did not answer, but he did not move away either. They found Amos Redding near the old boat ramp, scraping ice from a skiff he no longer owned. The skiff belonged to Harbor Light now. Everybody knew it. The name had been painted over, but old paint always remembered. Beneath the clean primer, if the light hit right, Soren could still make out the ghost of Mercy Ann, the name of Amos's wife. Amos was 53, broad through the shoulders and heavy in the middle, with a salt and pepper beard that looked trimmed by impatience. His hands were big and scarred from rope work, one finger bent crooked from an accident years before. He wore a brown canvas coat, a dark hoodie, rubber boots, and a black knit cap pulled low. Around his neck, on a cord, hung a wedding ring that no longer fit his damaged hand. He saw Soren coming and laughed without humor. "Well, look at that," Amos said. The law finally walking door to door after the houses already started floating. Soren stopped at the edge of the ramp. "I'm not here as law. That badge come off your face too." Tide's ears lifted, but he remained still. Soren kept the leash loose. "I'm asking about water." Amos jabbed the scraper toward the canal. "Water's wet. Tide comes in, tide goes out. Sometimes it takes what you love." "That enough for your little book? I heard your place flooded 3 times before you sold." The scraper stopped. For a moment, only the gulls made sound above them. Then Amos turned fully, and the anger in his face was old enough to have roots. "You hear a lot for a man who wasn't here." Soren took the hit because it was fair. Amos stepped closer. "You got a county paycheck. You got health coverage. You got that tall house your granddaddy left you, and maybe it leaks, but it's still standing. You know what I had? A wife's hospital bills, a grandson sleeping in a room that smelled like mildew, an insurance letter telling me my premium was going up again, and a bank man saying I was a risk. I'm not judging you. Yes, you are. You just do it quiet." Amos's voice did not rise, which made it cut deeper. "All you holdout folks judge the ones who sold like we handed over our mama's graves for a boat ride and a steak dinner." Soren's jaw tightened. Amos saw it. "Go on. Tell me land means more than money. Folks with money love saying that." Tide moved then, not toward Amos, but half a step between him and Soren. The dog's body was calm, his amber eyes steady. He did not challenge Amos. He simply interrupted the line anger had drawn between the two men. Amos looked at the dog, and something in his face shifted. "That the one you pulled out the water? Yes, poor thing. Amos looked back at the skiff. This marsh will drown anything it can't use, Soren almost answered. Rosalind's voice rose in his memory instead. Water don't lie. He put the pencil back in his pocket. What would have made you stay? He asked. Amos frowned as if the question offended him more than an accusation. What? If somebody had told you the flooding might not be natural, would it have made a difference? Amos stared at him for a long time. Behind them, melted snow dripped from the ramp rail. The canal moved slow and dark under a pale sky. Finally, Amos looked away. It would made me mad, he said. Mad don't pay the bank. But would it have made a difference? Amos scraped the last strip of ice from the boat with too much force. My wife kept photo albums in a cedar chest, he said. Second flood. Water got into it. Not all the way. Just enough. Faces stuck together. Her mama, my daddy, our first house before the porch fell in. His mouth tightened. After that, she stopped saying no to selling. Soren did not write it down. Not because it did not matter. Because Amos had not given it to him as testimony. Not yet. Rosalind found Soren an hour later and told him he was knocking wrong. They were standing behind her house, where oyster shells lay in neat white piles and an old cast iron pot sat upside down on a stump. Tide rested in a patch of weak sun, eyes half closed but ears awake. I'm knocking like a person knocks, Soren said. No, Rosalind replied. You're knocking like a man carrying a question people don't want to answer. That's still a person. That's a police officer trying hard not to look like one. He had no answer for that. Rosalind tied her red scarf tighter under her chin. People remember who came when their cousin got pushed off a dock and who didn't. They remember who wrote reports and said civil matter. They remember who told them to keep receipts while the water came through the floor. That wasn't me. Didn't say it was. Her eyes softened by 1 degree. But a uniform doesn't just cover one man. Sometimes it covers everybody who wore it before him. The words stayed with Soren as they crossed the marsh road toward Bethel Light A.M., a small white church with blue trim and a bell tower that leaned slightly left, as if even faith had learned to brace against coastal wind. In the basement, folding chairs had been arranged around a long table covered with file boxes, maps, coffee cups, and a plate of sweet biscuits no one had touched. Nia Beaumont stood at the far end of the table, reading 2 documents at once. She was not what Soren expected, though he could not have said what he expected. She was 41, composed without seeming distant, with locks tied low at the back of her neck and a navy blazer over a cream sweater. Her glasses rested halfway down her nose while she marked a page with a yellow tab. She had the calm of someone who knew panic was expensive and refused to pay for it. Rosalind announced him by saying, I brought the stubborn one. Nia did not look up. Which one? Tide lifted his head. Soren almost smiled. Only then did Nia glance over. Her eyes moved from Soren to Tide, then to the notebook in Soren's hand. You're Sergeant Blackwood, off duty for this. Good. Keep it that way. He liked her less immediately, which made him suspect she was useful. Around the table sat 6 residents from Blackwood Marsh, none looking fully comfortable. Some had envelopes, some had photographs. One woman held a plastic bag with a strip of mold-stained baseboard inside it, as if bringing part of her damaged house made the damage harder to deny. Nobody spoke loudly. The room had the careful quiet of people who had learned that hope could embarrass you if it arrived too early. Nia invited Soren to sit. He remained standing until Tide lowered himself beneath the chair. Rosalind tapped with her boot. Soren sat because refusing would have looked theatrical. For the next hour, he listened more than he spoke. That was harder than walking in cold water. Nia explained that many of the sales contracts were probably valid on their face. Signatures were real. Notarizations existed. Offers had been made. Checks had cleared. The law, she said, could see pressure only if someone showed how it was applied. They didn't need to forge your names, she told the room. They needed you to believe the land had already turned against you. A woman near the coffee urn wiped her cheek quickly. Nia continued. If Harbor Light, a contractor, or anyone connected to them manipulated drainage, flood reporting, maintenance records, or risk assessments, then this becomes something else. Not nostalgia, not regret, not a neighborhood angry about change. It becomes a pattern. Soren looked at the file boxes. And if we can't prove the pattern, then we do not have enough yet. The answer irritated him because it was honest. A motorboat passed outside the church, its engine echoing off the low ceiling vents. Soren stood before he knew he had moved. The chair legs scraped concrete. Every face turned toward him. Heat rushed up his neck. His right hand curled at his side. Empty and useless. The basement narrowed around the sound. Then Tide was there. The dog rose from under the chair and pressed his body against Soren's shin. Not hard, not dramatic. Just present enough to give Soren another thing to feel besides the engine. Fur against cloth. Warmth through fabric. Weight in the current moment. Soren looked down. Tide looked back with steady amber eyes, as if waiting for him to return without hurry. No one in the basement laughed. No one looked away in pity. Nia reached for a paper cup, filled it with water from the cooler, and slid it across the table without comment. Rosalind began talking about the Old North Gate as if nothing unusual had happened at all. "Used to be manual," Rosalind said. "Elijah could tell by the sound if it opened too wide." Soren sat down slowly. He took the cup. That small mercies did more to hold him in the room than any speech could have. By late afternoon, Nia had spread 3 sets of records across the table: public flood designations, county maintenance summaries, Harbor Light purchase offers. Soren added his notebook beside them, careful not to make it look more important than it was. Nia compared dates with a blue pen. "Here," she said. Everyone leaned in a little, though most tried to hide it. She tapped a maintenance entry dated 2 weeks before Amos sold. Emergency calibration. Her finger moved to another document. Flood event reported 3 days later. Then another. Purchase offer revised downward the following week. Rosalind's mouth hardened. Nia turned a page. Same language here. Emergency calibration. Flood event. Revised offer. Different parcel. Soren felt the room shift, not toward victory. Not yet. Toward attention. "What contractor?" he asked. Nia pulled the top sheet closer. Heron Gate Systems. Sensors. Remote gate controls. Pump scheduling. Small outfit on paper. But they appear in every maintenance file after Harbor Light's resilience grant. "Resilience," Amos muttered from the doorway. Everyone turned. He stood at the bottom of the basement steps, black cap in his hands, looking as if he hated every inch he had walked to get there. Rosalind did not smile. Nia did not rush him. Soren stayed still. Amos looked at the papers, then at Soren. "Don't write down what I said at the ramp." "I didn't. I know." His voice roughened. "That's why I came." He stepped into the room, not fully joining them, but no longer outside. Nia placed a blank legal pad in front of an empty chair. "No one has to say anything today," she told him. "But if you do, we write it clean." Amos stared at the chair as if it might cost him something. Then he sat. The room did not celebrate. No one clapped, thanked him, or made him carry more courage than he had offered. Nia simply wrote the date at the top of the page. Soren looked down at Tide. The dog had settled beneath the table again, tired from the walk, head resting on his paws. His torn ear twitched each time someone said water, gate, or pump. Not magic, not proof. Just memory and sense and a body that had learned to listen. Soren opened his notebook to a new page. He wrote, "Heron Gate Systems. Maintenance before flood events." Then, after a moment, he added, "People need room to come back." Outside, the last of the thin snow melted from the church steps. Water ran in clear lines along the concrete, following gravity the way water should. Inside the basement, the people of Blackwood Marsh sat around a table and began carefully to unlearn the habit of bowing their heads. The name Heron Gate Systems looked harmless on paper. That was the first thing Soren Blackwood hated about it. The company did not sound like something that could tilt a neighborhood toward ruin. It sounded like a small contractor with a clean logo, a mailbox, and a polite woman answering phones. In the county maintenance summaries, Heron Gate appeared beside words like calibration, flow assessment, sensor upgrade, and resilience support. Every phrase sat neatly inside a box. Every signature had a date. Every report used language careful enough to put a man to sleep before he noticed what had been taken from him. Nia Beaumont noticed. She spent the next 2 days in the basement of Bethel Light AME, with records spread across folding tables. Soren brought his notebook. Rosalind Cobb brought her old Tide book, 3 paper maps softened at the folds, and enough coffee to make patience possible. Amos Redding came once, sat for 19 minutes, said almost nothing, and left before anyone could thank him. Tide slept beneath the table, with his head on Soren's boot. The dog had gained strength, but not peace. His coat had begun to recover its black-gray sheen, and the small tear in his left ear had scabbed cleanly. Still, whenever a truck rumbled past the church or a distant motor echoed across the marsh, his eyes opened at once. Soren had learned the difference between Tide waking and Tide remembering. One afternoon, Nia slid a maintenance sheet toward Soren. "Same signature," she said. The name at the bottom was Calvin Toomey. Soren read it aloud once. "County infrastructure engineer. Mid-level," Nia said. "Not elected, not rich. Not the kind of man who gets invited to groundbreakings unless someone needs a hard hat in the photo." Rosalind leaned over the page. "I know his mama. Worked payroll at the clinic before her knees gave out." "That doesn't make him clean," Soren said. "No," Rosalind replied. "It makes him human, worst kind when things go bad." Nia tapped the report with the end of her pen. Calvin signed off on 3 emergency calibrations. Each one came before a flood event that got used in a property risk update. He may know nothing. He may know a little. He may have told himself he knows nothing because that lets him sleep. Soren looked toward the narrow basement window. Beyond the glass, the winter light had turned the churchyard silver. The last of the snow lay in thin patches along the shaded side of the steps. "What do we do?" he asked. "We don't corner him," Nia said. "We don't threaten him. You especially don't." Soren looked back at her. She did not soften the point. "If Calvin talks because Sergeant Blackwood shows up with a hard stare and a badge in his pocket, Nash will say you pressured a county employee in a matter tied to your own property. Even if Calvin tells the truth gets dirty. I know that. Good. Then know it when you're angry too." It was the kind of sentence that stayed useful and unpleasant. The next morning, Soren took Tide along the marsh road just after sunrise. Not toward Calvin, he told himself. Toward the water. Toward the north gate. Toward the place where his notebook had too many entries and not enough answers. The air was cold but clear. Ice had gathered in thin white seams along the reeds. The canal gave off a low mist, and the sun came up behind the cypress trees with a pale gold brightness that made even the warning signs look gentle. Tide walked beside him on a loose leash, wearing the temporary collar and moving with a careful, recovering strength. The dog's left foreleg no longer dragged, but Soren kept the pace slow. Near the north drainage road, Tide lifted his head. Soren smelled it a second later. Oil, warm metal, wet concrete. Then the pump kicked on. The sound was not loud, not by any reasonable measure. A steady mechanical thrum behind chain-link fencing and reed beds. But Tide's body changed at once. His shoulders lowered, his ears fixed forward. His nose pointed toward the low-block building beyond the fence, where a gray control box stood beside the pump housing. Soren stopped on the public side of the road. "Easy," he said. The word was for both of them. A white county truck was parked near the gate. Its driver door stood open. A man in an orange reflective jacket bent over the control box, one hand inside the panel, the other holding a tablet against his hip. Calvin Toomey looked smaller in person than his signature did on paper. He was in his mid-40s, narrow through the shoulders, with sandy brown hair thinning at the front and a face that seemed permanently tired. His khaki work pants were tucked awkwardly into mud-streaked boots. A cracked county ID badge swung from his jacket zipper each time he moved. He had the anxious precision of a man used to being blamed for systems he did not fully control. Tide took one step forward. The leash tightened. Calvin looked up. His eyes went first to the dog, then to Soren's face, then to the road behind Soren as if measuring the fastest way to leave without appearing to run. "Morning," Soren said. Calvin shut the control box too quickly. "All readings are automated," he said. Soren had not asked a question. That made the sentence hang in the cold. Soren felt the opening. A part of him, old and efficient, wanted to step through it before Calvin could recover. Ask why he had said that. Ask what readings. Ask who told him to expect questions. Ask until the man's fear gave shape to the thing behind it. Tide leaned against Soren's calf. Not much, just enough. Soren looked down at the dog and saw the tremor in Tide's shoulders. The pump sound was working through both of them. Two bodies hearing danger from different histories, both ready to move too fast. Soren loosened his grip on the leash. "I'm walking my dog," he said. Calvin blinked. "Right, public road. I didn't say it wasn't." "No. The pump continued behind the fence. Water began to move along the ditch beside the road, dark and wrong under the ice-fringed grass. Soren looked at it, then back at Calvin. "You should talk to counsel before you answer questions you think I'm asking." Color rose under Calvin's pale skin. "I don't need counsel. I'm doing routine maintenance. Then you're fine." Calvin swallowed. Soren turned slightly, giving him space to breathe. It went against every instinct he had. The man was afraid. Afraid men dropped things. Afraid men said more than they meant. Afraid men told the truth sideways if a person knew how to listen. But Naya's voice held him in place. "The truth gets dirty." "If something in those reports is wrong," Soren said, keeping his voice even, "Naya Beaumont is taking voluntary statements at Bethel Light. You can bring a lawyer. You can bring a union rep. You can bring silence if that's all you've got. But don't let somebody else decide what your name means on paper." Calvin stared at him. For a moment, the only sound was the pump and the small slap of water against the drainage stones. Then Calvin looked away first. "I don't know what you think you know." Soren nodded once. "That makes two of us." He walked Tide back down the road before the old part of him could change his mind. Halfway to the bend, the pump stopped. The sudden quiet made Soren's heartbeat sound too large in his ears. Tide pressed closer, but this time Soren did not stop. He kept moving until the gate disappeared behind the reeds. At the church basement that afternoon, Nia listened without interrupting, while Soren described the encounter. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied him. "What?" he asked. "You walked away. Wasn't much else to do." "There was plenty else to do," she said. "Most of it would have hurt us." Rosalind, who was labeling old maps with sticky notes, gave a satisfied grunt. "Maybe the dog's training him." Tide opened one eye from beneath the table. Soren did not argue because he was not sure Rosalind was wrong. The work changed after that. Nia began building columns across a yellow legal pad. Natural tide data, observed water level, maintenance event, property contact, insurance change. The pattern did not prove itself cleanly. Real life rarely arranged its wrongdoing for easy reading. But the dates had begun to lean toward one another. Amos arrived near dusk. This time he did not pretend he had come for coffee. He stood in the doorway with his black cap in his hands, the wedding ring on its cord resting against his chest. His face looked harder than usual, but tiredness had opened cracks in it. "Nash is saying things," Amos said. Nia capped her pen. "About whom?" Amos looked at Soren. "You." Soren waited. "He's saying you got yourself worked up, saying that dog made you see a pattern where there's just bad weather and old houses." Amos's mouth tightened. "Saying some men come back from hard service and start needing enemies." The basement went still. Rosalind's eyes flashed. "He say that to you?" "He says things to rooms, not people. Easier to deny." Soren felt the words enter him and looked for old wounds to live in. Tide rose before Soren could speak. The dog did not growl. He simply came beside Soren's chair and sat, shoulder against Soren's leg, facing Amos. Amos looked down at him. "I ain't your enemy, dog." "No," Soren said quietly. "You're not." Something in Amos's posture eased by a fraction. He stepped farther into the room. "Before I sold, insurance sent a man out. Young fellow, clean boots. Said our place had been moved into a higher repeated risk band. Said there was data. I asked what data. He said county water records and flood recurrence modeling. Nia reached for a fresh page. "Do you remember the company?" "Palmetto Mutual handled the policy. But the assessment had attachments. One was from the county. One had Harbor Light's name in the footer, small enough you'd miss it if you were mad." Soren looked up. Amos nodded once bitterly. "I was mad." "Do you still have it?" Nia asked. "My wife kept everything after the first flood. Said paper was the only thing in the house that floated." He looked at Soren. "I can bring it tomorrow." Nia wrote nothing for a moment. Then she asked, "Are you offering that voluntarily?" Amos gave a humorless breath. "Everybody in here loved that word. It matters." "I know." He looked at the empty chair beside the table. "Yes, voluntarily." He sat down. That was not forgiveness. Not between him and Soren. Not between him and himself. But it was movement, and Blackwood Marsh had been still too long. By nightfall, the legal pad had 3 strong threads. First, the natural tide data did not match the watermarks Soren and Rosalind had recorded. Second, Calvin Toomey's reports repeated phrases that sounded less like observation and more like language copied from a template. No abnormal flow detected. Routine environmental variance, no manual deviation confirmed. Third, Harbor Light's purchase pressure seemed to follow the same rhythm again and again. Flood event, risk notice, revised offer, quiet visit. Another family deciding survival cost less than resistance. Nia rubbed the bridge of her nose. It's not enough. Rosalind made a sound of disgust. How many times does wrong have to repeat before it counts? In court, Nia said, more than our hearts would like. Soren looked at Tide, asleep again but restless. The dog's paws twitched faintly, chasing or escaping something in dreams. We need someone inside the records, Soren said. Nia nodded. We need the version before the version. No one asked what she meant. They all understood. The final report was the face shown to the world. The draft was where fear left fingerprints. At 9:17 that night, someone knocked on the basement door. Not the church entrance upstairs. The side door near the storage room, where volunteers carried in canned goods and folding chairs. Everyone froze. Nia raised one hand, not alarmed, only commanding silence. Soren stood slowly. Tide came up beside him, body alert but controlled. The knock came again. Rosalind went to the small window and looked out. It's him. Calvin Toomey stood under the side light in a gray rain jacket, hood low, shoulders hunched against cold mist. He held a waterproof pouch in both hands like it might bite him. Nia opened the door herself. Calvin did not step in right away. His eyes moved across the room. Rosalind, Amos, Soren, Tide, the tables, the maps, the boxes of other people's almost lost homes. I'm not confessing to anything, he said. Nia's voice stayed calm. Then don't. I didn't know they were trying to take land. No one asked you that yet. His mouth opened, then closed. Nia stepped back. You can leave. You can stay. You can call a lawyer from here. Nothing you hand me should be stolen, coerced, or misunderstood. You understand that? Calvin nodded too fast. Soren said nothing. That silence cost him more than any question would have. Calvin entered and placed the pouch on the table. Inside was a small USB drive, 2 printed emails, and a folded copy of a draft maintenance report marked preliminary. His hands shook as he pushed them toward Nia. These are drafts, he said. Not final. The final versions are in the county system. Nia did not touch the drive yet. What am I looking at? Calvin swallowed. Sensor drift at the north gate. Manual override windows. Backflow warnings. Notes I wrote before the language changed. Changed by whom? I don't know exactly. He heard how weak that sounded and looked ashamed. Requests came through Heron Gate. Sometimes copied to the county administrator. Sometimes not. They said the wording was too speculative. Said public reports needed plain language. Nia put on gloves before handling the papers. Calvin watched her do it, and the care seemed to frighten him more than anger would have. I thought it was paperwork, he said. I thought worst case. Somebody was making the project look cleaner. I didn't think. His voice broke off. Amos leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the table. You didn't think about whose floors got wet, Amos said. Calvin flinched. Nia looked at Amos once, not sharply, but enough. Amos said no more. Calvin turned to Soren then. I didn't know they were pushing people out. Soren wanted to answer with every flooded step, every closed door, every photo stuck together in Amos's ruined album, every survey flag standing where his grandfather had once dried nets. Instead, he looked at Tide. The dog stood beside Calvin now, not touching him, only close enough for the man to know he had been approached by something that had survived consequences people kept calling accidental. Soren took a breath. Not knowing doesn't dry a house, he said. Calvin lowered his eyes. Nia slid a blank statement form onto the table, but did not push it toward him. Not knowing also doesn't have to be the last true thing you say, she told him. Your signature is already in this. Speaking now may be the first time your name helps somebody instead of protecting somebody else. Calvin stared at the form. Outside, cold mist tapped against the basement window. Somewhere beyond the church, the tide moved through the dark marsh according to laws older than contracts, older than fear, older than every polished word men had used to disguise it. Calvin reached for the pen. His hand was still shaking, but he signed the top of the voluntary disclosure page anyway. By the next morning, Soren Blackwood understood that Nash Rutledge did not need to win the truth. He only needed to make people afraid of standing beside it. The first version came through a woman at the grocery counter, who stopped talking when Soren stepped into line. The second came from a dockhand, who looked at Tide, then at Soren, and suddenly remembered somewhere else he needed to be. By noon, the shape of it was clear enough. A short video had been moving through town, passed from phone to phone with the guilty speed of something no one wanted to admit they had watched twice. It showed Soren at the landing 2 weeks earlier, turning sharply when a boat engine backfired near the ramp. The clip lasted only 4 seconds. 4 seconds were enough when cut from a life. The video did not show the loose fuel line that had caused the engine cough. It did not show Soren stepping back, taking a breath, and helping the boat owner shut the motor down safely. It did not show Tide pressing against his leg afterward while an old man thanked him for noticing the problem before it became expensive. It showed only the flinch. Under it, someone had written, "This is who's accusing Harbor Light?" No threat, no accusation, just a question shaped like a hook. Soren saw it in Lieutenant Jessa Wren's office because she put her phone face up on the desk and let him decide whether to pick it up. He did not. Jessa's office smelled of coffee, rain jackets, and paper that had been handled by too many people in a hurry. She stood behind the desk in her dark navy command jacket, chestnut hair tucked behind one ear, eyes steady enough to make evasion feel childish. "Soren," she said, "they're not arguing with your notebook. They're arguing with your credibility." He looked through the blinds toward the parking lot. Cold rain tapped against the windows, not snow yet, but the sky had the pale heaviness that promised worse. "I know what they're doing." "Knowing doesn't keep you from reacting." He turned back to her. Jessa did not apologize for the sentence. That was one reason he trusted her. She slid a form across the desk. "I need you to sign this." Soren looked at it. Administrative recusal from any department involvement related to Harbor Light, Blackwood Marsh, Heron Gate, county drainage, or property complaints connected to your parcel. "I'm already not working it as police." "Then make it official." The words hit harder than they should have. Official made it feel like surrender, like handing Nash the cleanest version of what he wanted. Sergeant Blackwood removed from the board. Jessa seemed to read that in his face. "This protects the case," she said. "It also protects you. From them? From yourself if they keep pushing." That landed. Soren thought of Calvin Toomey's shaking hands, Amos Redding's bitterness, Nia Beaumont putting on gloves before touching the draft reports. Every careful thing they had done could be made smaller by one uncontrolled moment. He signed. The pen felt heavier than it was. Jessa took the form but did not file it immediately. "You're still a property owner, still a witness, still a citizen. You can attend the hearing. You can speak if called. You can hand over records through Nia. But I don't get to be the shield." Jessa's expression softened, barely. "Maybe this time the shield is the part you put down." Soren left her office with the rain needling his face and the official weight of being removed from his own fight sitting behind his ribs. By evening, 2 residents who had promised Nia statements had asked for more time. One would not answer her calls. Amos showed up at the church basement, furious in a way that had fear under it. His son Marcus worked seasonal electrical jobs for a subcontractor tied to Heron Gate. Someone had reminded Amos of that. Not in writing. Never in writing. Just enough words in the right place. "Nash don't have to raise a hand," Amos said, pacing near the folding chairs. "He just points at your bills and waits for you to kneel." Nia wrote nothing while he spoke. Sometimes the most respectful thing she did was not turn pain into paperwork too quickly. Rosalind sat near the coffee urn, hands wrapped around a cup she had not drunk from. "This is how it worked before," she said. "One house at a time, one job, one loan, one son." Soren stood near the map table with Tide beside him. The dog's temporary collar had been replaced by a sturdier black one, still plain, still without any official mark. Tide watched Amos pace, ears moving with each sharp turn, but he stayed close to Soren. "What do you need from me?" Soren asked. Nia looked up. "Tonight, nothing dramatic. That seems to be your favorite answer." "It's my most useful one." She closed a folder. "Go home. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow at the hearing, you don't defend yourself against gossip. You answer questions. You speak to records. You don't give Nash a scene." Soren almost said he knew. Then he thought of the video. "I'll try," he said instead. Nia accepted that as more honest than a promise. The freezing rain turned to wet snow after dark. It came down thin and slanted, bright in the porch light, hissing where it touched the warmer boards. Soren returned home with tide just after 9. The house looked smaller under the weather, its patched siding damp, its roof shining black in places where ice had begun to gather. The old shrimp bell beside the door moved in the wind but made no sound. Its clapper had been stiff for years. Inside, Soren fed Tide, checked the dog's leg, and set the Harbor Light envelope, his notebook, and copies of his water photographs into a plastic file box by the table. The real files were with Nia now. Copies sat in 3 places. He had learned that much. He did not check the windows 3 times, only once. That felt like progress until the wind shoved against the back wall, and his body answered before his mind could stop it. Tide lifted his head from the rug. "I'm fine," Soren said. The dog did not believe him. Soren shut off the kitchen light and sat at the table in the dim glow from the stove. He did not want bed. Bed meant stillness. Stillness gave memory room to walk. So he sat with one hand resting on the closed notebook and listened to the weather. At some point he slept sitting up. Tide woke him, not with a bark at first, with a sound low in the throat, urgent and wrong. Soren opened his eyes to gray smoke moving along the ceiling. For half a second the room had no name. Heat. Haze. Wood snapping somewhere below. A hard chemical smell beneath old rope and wet boards. Tide stood in front of him, body tense, torn ear flattened back, eyes fixed on Soren's face as if dragging him toward recognition by will alone. Then the dog barked, sharp, commanding. Soren stood too fast, chair hitting the floor behind him. His lungs caught. The smoke thickened near the hallway, sliding under the bedroom door and up through the cracks by the mudroom. The house seemed to tilt in his vision. Sound broke apart. Wind became rotor wash. Wood became something else. The past came through the walls wearing the present skin. Tide lunged forward and grabbed Soren's sleeve, not hard enough to harm, hard enough to insist. The pull steadied him. Soren looked down at the dog's teeth in the fabric, the black muzzle, the amber eyes, the living weight at the end of his arm. South Carolina, kitchen, house, Tide. He moved. He grabbed the file box first, then dropped it near the door when he realized how little that mattered. The originals were safe. Nia had them. Rosalind had copies. Paper could be replaced, breath could not. He wrapped one arm over his mouth and followed Tide toward the porch. Smoke pushed from the mudroom floorboards. Somewhere beneath the house, small flames moved where the storage area met the old net racks. Not a roaring wall, not yet. Something low, fed by whatever had been placed wrong or changed wrong or left wrong, by hands that wanted an accident more than a blaze. The back way was worse. Tide turned before Soren did, barking once toward the front. They went through the kitchen. A strip of ceiling paint curled from the heat. The old house groaned around them, not giving up, only suffering. At the front door, Tide stumbled. Soren saw the dog favor his left foreleg as he crossed a patch of hot ash blown in through the floor vent. "No," Soren said, voice rough. "Keep moving." He opened the door into cold air and half-carried, half-guided Tide onto the porch. They made it down the steps as neighbors' lights began coming on across the canal. The cold hit Soren hard enough to make him cough. He dropped to one knee in the wet snow, one hand in Tide's fur. The dog was shaking, but still upright. A small patch on his foreleg looked raw where heat had brushed him. Soren touched around it carefully, and Tide leaned into him instead of pulling away. Behind them, the lower storage area smoked under the house. The flames had not taken everything, but they had taken enough old net racks. Spare lumber Elijah had saved. A crate of rusted tools. The shelf where Soren kept things he could not throw away and did not know how to display. Neighbors came with hoses, buckets, and faces full of fear they tried to hide with motion. Someone called emergency services. Someone shouted that the power had been cut at the side box. Another voice said not to touch anything. Soren heard all of it from a distance, as if the world had moved across water. He saw the shrimp bell lying in the mud. It must have fallen when part of the porch rail gave way. The brass was blackened on one side, the green patina scarred, the bent handle sunk halfway into wet earth. For years he had ignored that bell, because ringing it felt like pretending his grandfather might answer. Now, seeing it in the mud, Soren felt something inside him go very quiet. Nash did not appear. Of course he did not. That was the genius of it. The cruelty wore no face. A bad wire, a misplaced can, a blocked vent, a house old enough to blame itself. By morning there would be people willing to say these things happened in winter. Old structures failed. Men under stress forgot precautions. Accidents loved lonely houses. Soren sat in the wet snow with tide pressed against him, and understood that the fire had not been meant to burn evidence. It had been meant to make him feel foolish for having tried to save anything. By midnight, the immediate danger was over. The lower portion of the house was charred and wet. The kitchen survived. The bedroom survived. Enough of the porch stood to look wounded rather than gone. A county fire investigator walked the perimeter with a flashlight, careful and quiet. Jessa arrived in her police rain jacket, said very little, and kept other officers from asking Soren questions while smoke still clung to his hair. Nia came next, coat thrown over courtroom clothes, a folder under one arm even then. "You have the file?" Soren asked before she could speak. She looked at him, then at Tide. "Yes, and so does Rosalind, and so does my office." "Good." "That is not the only thing that matters." He almost snapped at her. The words rose, sharp and ready. Tide shifted and set his injured paw down gingerly, trusting Soren not to forget it. The anger broke apart before it found a target. Rosalind arrived last, walking through the slush with her red scarf tied tight and her face set like weathered wood. She did not ask permission. She went straight to the mud, bent with a small sound of effort, and picked up the blackened shrimp bell. Soren watched her wipe it with the edge of her coat. "It's bent," he said. "So are most things that survive." She placed the bell in his hands. The metal was cold now, but Soren could still imagine the heat that had marked it. His grandfather's hands had touched this bell. His own hands had avoided it for years. Now there it was, damaged enough to be honest. Rosalind stood in front of him, short, solid, and unmoved by his attempt to look like the smoke had not reached his heart. "This house is wood," she said. "Important wood, yes. Loved wood. But wood." She pointed toward the dark marsh beyond the road. "What they want is for you to think belonging can burn." Soren looked at the bell in his palms. Tide lay beside him on a blanket someone had brought, his foreleg wrapped loosely by Naya's scarf until a veterinarian could see him. The dog's eyes stayed on Soren, tired but awake. For the first time all night, Soren let himself feel how close he had come to staying inside. Not because he wanted to be gone, because panic could turn a doorway into a puzzle, because old memories could make a safe path invisible, because a man could survive war and still need a wounded dog to pull him through his own kitchen. He lowered one hand to Tide's head. "I don't know if I can stand in that room tomorrow," he said. No one rushed to tell him he could. That helped. Nia crouched nearby, careful of the mud. "Then sit if you have to. Answer one question at a time. Let the documents stand where they can. Let the rest of us stand too." Jessa nodded once from the edge of the porch light. "You are not testifying as a shield. You are testifying as a witness." Amos stood beyond her, half in shadow. He had not come close, but he had come. His black cap was in his hands. Soren looked at the faces around him. Not many. Not enough to fix what had burned. Enough to make leaving feel like a choice instead of a collapse. The snow thinned before dawn. The house stood behind him, charred under the pilings, still holding. The canal lay black and quiet beyond the dock. In his hands the bell did not ring. Not yet. Soren wrapped his fingers around it anyway. Tomorrow, he would go to the hearing. Not to punish Nash Rutledge. Not to prove he was steady. Not to defend a piece of wood already marked by smoke. He would go because too many houses in Blackwood Marsh had been burning slowly for years, and most of them had never been allowed to show flames. The county building looked too clean for what it was about to hold. Its brick front had been washed by freezing rain, and a thin white layer of snow rested along the window ledges like powdered sugar on a cake nobody wanted to cut. Muddy pickup trucks filled the lot beside sedans with county decals, work vans, and two polished black SUVs that could only belong to Harbor Light Marina partners or people who wished they did. Soren Blackwood sat in the passenger seat of Rosalind Cobb's old truck and watched people climb the steps. He wore a white shirt, a dark blazer that had belonged to no uniform, and boots cleaned as well as smoke damage allowed. The smell of last night still clung faintly to him no matter how long he had stood under the shower. Wood smoke, wet ash, burned rope. A house hurt badly enough to change the air around a man. Tide lay across the back seat on a folded blanket, his left foreleg wrapped in a clean white bandage. The veterinarian had said the injury was minor, but Soren kept looking back anyway. Rosalind noticed. She noticed everything. "If you check that dog one more time," she said, "he's going to start charging you rent." Tide lifted his head at the sound of her voice, then lowered it again with the tired dignity of a patient who found humans dramatic. Soren looked toward the county doors. "You ready?" "No," Rosalind said, opening her door. "But I'm old enough to know ready is a luxury." Inside, the hearing room hummed with controlled discomfort. County officials sat on a raised dais beneath a seal that promised service, stewardship, and public trust. Rows of folding chairs filled the room. Blackwood Marsh residents clustered together but not too tightly, as if years of caution had taught them not to look organized before powerful people. A few Harbor Light employees sat near the front in pressed jackets. Reporters from 2 local outlets stood along the wall. At the far right, Nash Rutledge stood beside his attorney and a screen showing a rendering of the proposed marina. Bright docks, smiling tourists, clean walkways, sunset over water made harmless by design. Nash wore a charcoal suit, pale blue shirt, and a silver tie. His face carried the burdened patience of a man prepared to be misunderstood by people he considered smaller than himself. Nia Beaumont had chosen the opposite kind of appearance. No slideshow waited behind her, no oversized promises, just banker's boxes, marked folders, a laptop, and 3 residence-worn documents sealed in plastic sleeves. Her navy suit was simple, her locks tied low, her expression calm enough to worry anyone who depended on noise. Soren took a seat behind her. Tide eased down at his feet, bandaged paw stretched carefully to one side. Nash saw the dog. For one brief second, his eyes moved to the bandage. Then they returned to the board. The hearing began with procedure: names, agenda items, public comment rules, time limits. A county chair named Everett Mallory, a thin man with silver hair and rimless glasses, reminded everyone that this was not a trial. The board would not decide criminal liability. It would consider whether pending permits, drainage approvals, and land use recommendations connected to Harbor Light should continue as scheduled. Nash spoke first. That, Soren thought, was how men like Nash preferred the world. Arranged so their version met the air before anyone else's did. "Blackwood Marsh is beloved," Nash said, turning just enough to include the room. "No one disputes that. Harbor Light respects its history, but respect must include honesty. The area has suffered repeated flooding, infrastructure decline, and long-term viability concerns. Our project offers responsible investment where abandonment has already begun." The screen changed behind him. A future restaurant, a boardwalk, a kayak launch, families smiling under warm lights. "Our opponents," Nash continued, "have framed this as displacement. We see it as rescue. Jobs, tax revenue, safer drainage, modern docks, and renewed public access. We cannot allow nostalgia to trap families in failing conditions." A murmur passed through the Blackwood Marsh side of the room. Soren felt Tide shift against his boot. Nash did not look at him when he said, "Recent accusations have come from emotion, personal grievance, and a misunderstanding of technical flood data." There it was, not a direct attack, a doorway. Nia let it remain open. When her turn came, she stood without touching her laptop. "Harbor Light is correct about one thing," she said. "This is not a trial, so I will not ask this board to decide intent, guilt, or punishment today. I will ask you to decide whether county approvals should continue when the data supporting them may have been shaped by the very parties who benefited from the conclusions." The room quieted differently. Not dramatically. Professionally. That was worse for Nash. Nia began with weather, rainfall totals from an independent station, tide charts from a federal coastal monitoring point, photographs of marked steps from 7 homes, dates and times. Nothing emotional yet, nothing that could be accused of memory. She placed each fact beside another and let the space between them narrow. "At 7:18 a.m. on December 12th, she said. Water reached the 3rd lower step of the Blackwood property before the expected high tide window. At the same time, a Northgate pump was audible from multiple properties. Here is the tide chart. Here is the rainfall record. Here is the photograph taken from private property." Soren watched the board members lean forward. Nia did not smile. She moved to maintenance records, Herringate systems, emergency calibration, sensor adjustment, flow optimization. The phrases appeared again and again, each one clean until placed beside the flood events that followed. Then Rosalind Cobb stood. She moved slowly to the microphone, wearing a dark blue dress beneath her old brown coat, a small silver shrimp pin fixed near her collar. The pin caught the room lights when she turned. "My name is Rosalind Cobb," she said. "I ran a shrimp boat out of Blackwood Marsh for 36 years. Before that, I watched my father do it. Before that, my grandfather read water, before most men around here could read paper." A few people smiled despite themselves. Rosalind did not. "I am not against change. I am against pretending water changed its mind all by itself." She spoke of tide lines on porch posts, of hand-notched boards used for decades, of the old North Gate, before remote controls and consultant reports. She did not romanticize the marsh. She admitted storms had worsened. She admitted houses had aged. She admitted some repairs had been delayed because poor people often repaired what screamed first. Then she pointed to the records. "But this pattern is not weather. Weather does not schedule itself 2 days before a revised offer. Weather does not use the same language in 6 reports. Weather does not tell an insurance company which old woman's kitchen floor got wet." Nash's attorney objected gently, reminding the board that speculation should be limited. Nia nodded. "Mrs. Cobb is offering lay testimony regarding observed water behavior over time. We will distinguish that from technical conclusions." Rosalind looked at the attorney as if he were a gull stealing bait and returned to her seat. Amos Redding came next. He walked to the microphone with his black cap in both hands. The room did not know what to do with him. Some residents had been angry when he sold. Some had envied him. Some had followed him later. He had become, without asking, a symbol of surrender. His voice came out rough. "My name is Amos Redding. I sold my family place on Cattail Bend 18 months ago." He looked at no one at first. "My house flooded 3 times in 2 seasons. After the second time, insurance moved me into a higher repeated risk band. Bank said refinancing repairs would be difficult. Harbor Light revised their offer down after that, said they were taking on water risk." He paused. "My wife had medical bills. My grandson needed a dry room. I signed because I thought the land was dying faster than I could protect it." His fingers tightened around the cap. "I told other folks to sign too. That hurt the room." Soren felt it move through people like cold through floorboards. Amos swallowed and lifted his eyes. "I'm not proud of that, but shame ain't the same as proof, so I brought the letters." He nodded toward Nia. "Insurance notice. Risk attachment. Revised offer. Same month as one of those maintenance events." He returned to his chair older than he had left it. No one clapped. That was mercy. Calvin Toomey stood after a short recess. He looked worse under fluorescent lights. His orange work jacket had been replaced by a wrinkled gray blazer over a shirt that did not sit right at the collar. His cracked county ID badge was gone. Without it, he seemed less like an official and more like a man who had misplaced the thing he used to hide behind. Nia asked simple questions. Did he sign the maintenance summaries? Yes. Did the final reports differ from earlier drafts? Yes. Did the earlier drafts contain notes about sensor drift, manual override windows, and backflow warnings? Yes. Were those notes removed or softened in final public summaries? Calvin closed his eyes once. Yes. The board chair leaned toward his microphone. By whom? Calvin looked at Nia, then at the board. Requests came through Herringate systems, sometimes copied to county administration. The stated reason was clarity, public readability, avoiding unsupported language. Were you instructed by Mr. Rutledge personally? Nash's attorney asked. No, Calvin said. Nash's side relaxed slightly. Calvin continued, quieter. But Harbor Light personnel were copied on enough communications for me to know the project team cared very much about how the reports described the flooding. The relaxation ended. Nia displayed 2 lines on the screen. Draft, backflow likely increased by manual gate timing during rising tide window. Final, observed inundation consistent with extreme tidal variance. She let the room read them. Then another. Draft, north sensor drift may be producing inaccurate trigger thresholds. Final, no abnormal sensor behavior confirmed. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like a clerk changing words 1 line at a time. Soren was called near the end. As he walked to the microphone, Tide rose. The dog was not required to follow, but he did, slowly, bandaged paw careful on the polished floor. A murmur moved through the room. Soren did not look at Nash. He placed his burned shrimp bell on the table beside his notebook. The blackened brass made a small, dull sound against the wood. Chair Mallory frowned. "Sergeant Blackwood, is that relevant to your testimony?" Soren looked at the bell. "Only to explain why I'm here as a witness, not as an officer." Nia did not object. Nash's attorney did. "This hearing concerns drainage approvals, not personal artifacts." Soren nodded before the chair could rule. "He's right. That surprised the room." Soren moved the bell aside. "I won't use it as evidence." Then he opened the waterproof notebook. He testified to dates, times, watermarks, pump sounds, photographs, locations from his own property, and public access. He testified that Tide reacted to the pump noise and reverse water movement, but he did not offer the dog as proof of anything beyond what he had personally observed afterward. Nash's attorney rose with practiced concern. "Sergeant Blackwood, are you currently on modified duty?" "Yes." "For sleep-related and stress-related concerns?" "Yes." "Do you sometimes react strongly to sudden engine noises?" "Yes." The attorney let the words sit. Soren felt the room watching him. His hand wanted the bell. Instead, he rested it on the notebook. "Yes," he said again, before the attorney could continue. "That is why I stopped trusting my reactions as evidence. I wrote things down. I photographed water lines. I checked tide charts. I gave the records to counsel. I recused myself from department involvement. I did not enter restricted property. I did not question county employees under color of authority. I did not ask this board to believe my fear." He looked at the dais. "I'm asking you to look at the records." Tide lowered himself beside his chair, the bandage bright against the dark floor. For the first time all day, Nash looked less polished. The board took 43 minutes behind closed doors. No one in the hallway knew what to do with that much waiting. Rosalind sat with her hands folded over her purse. Amos stood near a vending machine without buying anything. Calvin leaned against a wall and looked sick with relief or dread. Nia checked messages, but did not answer most of them. Soren stood by a window with Tide at his feet, watching snow melt on the courthouse steps. Nash approached once. "Not close. Close enough." "You think this helps them?" he said softly. Soren did not turn. Nash looked toward the residents. "They'll still need jobs, repairs, money. You can stop a project for a season, maybe. You can't make poverty noble enough to live in." Soren looked at him then. "No." Nash seemed almost pleased. Then Soren said, "But we can stop calling it rescue when you hold the water line against their door." The hearing room reopened. Chair Mallory read the decision in a voice that tried not to shake. The board voted to suspend Harbor Light-related drainage approvals and marina permits pending independent review. It directed County Council to preserve all records connected to Heron Gate systems, requested state review of drainage operations and procurement, and recommended an administrative hold on county processing tied to project-linked parcel transfers until the review concluded. No one was convicted. No one was handcuffed. No one's home was returned by a sentence. But the machine stopped moving. For the first time, officially, it stopped. Nash stood and buttoned his suit jacket. "This is fear of progress," he said. "Not to the board alone, but to the room. I tried to bring investment to a place that everyone else had written off. Remember that when the jobs leave with us." Rosalind rose before Nia could stop her. Her voice was not loud. "You didn't bring a boat to drowning people," she said. "You held their heads under and tried to sell them the rope." The room fell completely still. Nash's face did not change enough to satisfy anyone, but he left without answering. Outside, the snow had nearly melted from the steps. Water ran in thin streams toward the gutter, following the slope it was given. Soren stood with Tide beside him and the burned bell wrapped in his hand. No one cheered. The silence meant more. For the first time in years, the people of Blackwood Marsh had heard the truth spoken in a room where someone was required to write it down. For 3 days after the hearing, nothing looked saved. That was the part nobody put in speeches. The county board had suspended Harbor Light's approvals. State investigators had requested records. Heron Gate Systems had gone quiet behind a lawyer's statement about cooperating fully. Nash Rutledge had not appeared at the Marsh, though one of his black SUVs passed the county building twice on Monday and once on Tuesday, clean as a lie in daylight. But Blackwood Marsh still woke to bills. Roofs still leaked. Engines still needed parts. Insurance companies did not lower premiums because people had told the truth in a public room. Families who had already sold their land did not receive keys back by sunrise. The same water still moved under the houses, cold and dark and indifferent to human relief. Soren Blackwood understood that better each morning. He woke on Rosalind Cobb's sofa the first night after the hearing, then on a cot in the church basement the second, then in his own damaged house on the third because he could not bear being away from it any longer. The kitchen was usable. The bedroom smelled faintly of smoke. The lower storage area was blackened, braced with temporary lumber, and taped off where the investigators still needed to finish notes. Tide slept beside the stove in a nest of old quilts, his bandaged forelegs stretched out with regal impatience. The dog disliked being treated as fragile. He disliked medicine hidden in food. He disliked the plastic cone the veterinarian had suggested, and Soren had declined after one look at Tide's offended face. "You'd have eaten that thing out of principle," Soren told him. Tide blinked once, accepting the accuracy without gratitude. The house was quieter now because damaged things often were. The loose boards that once spoke underfoot had burned away. The old crab traps were gone. The spare net racks Elijah Blackwood had built by hand were reduced to charred metal hooks and a few salvageable planks stacked near the steps. Each loss seemed small when named alone. Together, they made Soren feel as if someone had taken a language he had not realized he still spoke. On the fourth morning, Lieutenant Jessa Wren came by before sunrise. She did not arrive in a patrol car. She came in her own pickup, wearing jeans, a navy rain jacket, and the expression of a woman who had brought bad news carefully folded. Soren met her on the porch. Tide rose but did not bark. "Internal review opened?" Soren asked. Jessa's mouth twitched. "Good morning to you, too." He waited. "Yes," she said. "Routine, given the public complaint Harbor Lights Council filed. They are alleging misuse of position, intimidation, conflict of interest, all the usual polished garbage." Soren looked out at the canal. And I already submitted your recusal, my memo, body camera records showing no assigned department action, and the timeline proving your evidence went through Nia as a private citizen." She folded her arms. "You'll still answer questions. You'll still hate it. That part sounds familiar. It should." Her face softened slightly. "You did it right, Soren. Not perfect. Right." That sentence stayed with him after she left. Not perfect. Right. There had been years when Soren thought those words could not stand in the same room. By the end of the week, Nia Beaumont had turned the church basement into something between a legal clinic and a tide school. Folding tables held labeled boxes, land records, insurance notices, purchase offers, flood photos, family deeds, repair receipts, old maps. A handwritten sign taped to the wall read, "If it happened, write it down. If you sign it, bring it in. If you don't understand it, ask before you sign again." Nia hated the sign because Rosalind had written it in marker without consulting her. Rosalind loved the sign because everyone understood it. Young people came first out of curiosity, then because their grandparents sent them, then because they realized knowing how to request public records made them feel taller. They learned how to compare a tide chart to a watermark. They learned that a clean contract could still have an ugly story behind it. They learned that a county record was not holy simply because it had a seal. Rosalind unlocked the old bait shed behind her house and began moving boxes into it. The shed smelled of salt, cedar, and things that had survived too many summers. She called it an archive, though Amos said it looked like a hurricane had tried to organize a library. "Good," Rosalind said. "Then it'll feel familiar." Amos came more often than anyone expected, not proudly, not comfortably. He arrived early, carried boxes, fixed a broken shelf, and left before people could soften toward him too quickly. Some residents still looked at him with hurt in their faces. A woman whose brother had sold after Amos told him to said, "You helped them scare us," and Amos did not defend himself. He only said, "I know, that did not repair anything," but it did not add another lie. One afternoon, Soren found Amos outside the shed, sanding an old plank smooth enough for a label board. The black knit cap sat beside him. The wedding ring on its cord swung lightly as he worked. "You don't have to take every hard look," Soren said. Amos kept sanding. That advice from a man who built a career out of taking hard looks, maybe from a man trying to retire from it. Amos gave a short, surprised laugh. Then his face settled. "My boy still might lose that electrical work," he said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He told me he was tired of fixing things that made his neighbors flood." Amos looked toward the marsh. "Proud of him. Scared too. Both can fit." Soren nodded. Both can fit. That became the lesson of the weeks that followed. Relief and fear. Anger and patience. Damage and repair. Tide's warm body beside Soren's chair, and the burn smell still rising when damp air moved under the house. The county's suspension order, and the long road of appeals. People bringing biscuits to Rosalind's archive and still avoiding certain conversations because courage, like old wood, could only hold so much weight at once. The house repair began on a clear Saturday after the cold front broke. Not because Soren asked. He had planned to do it alone. That was the plan he trusted most, the one that never required anyone else to arrive. He had bought lumber, sorted the salvaged planks, and laid tools out on the porch before dawn. He had told himself the work would go faster without people asking where to stand. At 8, Rosalind appeared with a thermos of coffee and a pan of cornbread wrapped in towels. At 8:30, Amos arrived with 2 sawhorses and a nail gun he claimed was borrowed, though nobody asked from whom. At 9, 3 teenagers from the church came carrying gloves and the particular nervous energy of young people trying to be useful in front of adults they respected. By 10, Nia walked up in muddy boots and a work coat, her legal bag replaced by a box of labeled folders and a first aid kit. Soren stood on the porch and looked at all of them. "I didn't ask for help," he said. Rosalind climbed the steps past him. "We know. That's why we came." No one called him brave. No one called him a hero. That helped more than praise would have. They worked in uneven rhythm through the morning. Salvaged boards were cut and fitted beside new ones. The lower storage frame was reinforced. Burned sections came out slowly, because Soren insisted on examining each plank before throwing it away. Some were too damaged to keep. Some only looked ruined until scraped clean. Amos knew the difference and did not make Soren say why it mattered. Tide watched from a blanket near the open door, his bandaged foreleg resting forward like an old commander displeased with being kept from duty. Every so often, one of the teenagers glanced at him. "Can I pet him?" a boy asked. Soren looked at Tide. Tide looked at the boy. "Let him decide," Soren said. The boy crouched a few feet away and held out the back of his hand. Tide considered the offer with solemn suspicion, then leaned forward enough to sniff. After a moment, he placed his muzzle briefly against the boy's knuckles. The boy's face lit up as if he had been chosen for something sacred. Soren turned away before anyone saw his own expression. Near sunset, Rosalind brought him the shrimp bell. She had cleaned the mud from it, but left the blackened scar across one side. The handle was still bent. The clapper, freed by heat or accident, moved when she placed it in his hands. "You want it polished?" she asked. "No." "Good. I was going to refuse." Soren carried it to the porch beam beside the door, the same place it had hung before the fire. He drove the hook in slowly. Tide lifted his head at each tap of the hammer, but did not startle. The house seemed to listen with him. When Soren hung the bell, wind moved through the porch. For the first time in years it rang. Not loud, not clear like church metal. More of a cracked, low note, roughened by age and fire. But it was sound. It was proof that damage had not taken the voice from it. Everyone stopped working. The note faded over the canal. Soren kept one hand on the post until the vibration left the wood. Elijah Blackwood did not answer. The dead did not return because bells rang. But for a moment, Soren felt less like the last man guarding an old door, and more like one hand in a long line of hands that had held it open. That night, after everyone left, the house felt strange. Not empty. Strange because it had been entered without being invaded. People had brought tools, food, opinions, arguments about board length, bad jokes, and muddy boot prints. They had moved through rooms Soren had once kept closed by habit. Nothing terrible had happened because of it. The thought unsettled him. He checked the back window once. Then he stopped. Tide lay near the bedroom doorway. no longer pressed tight to the wall, but still positioned where he could see Soren and the front entrance. The bandage on his leg was smaller now. His breathing had the deep, steady rhythm of a dog, allowing sleep to take him seriously. Soren sat on the edge of the bed. The wind picked up after midnight. It rattled the new porch rail, then the side window, then the old bell outside the door. Soren woke instantly, heart kicking hard, one hand already halfway to the floor. Tide lifted his head. The room was dark but not unknowable. The door was open. The window was shut. The house moved in wind, not danger. Water pulled beneath the pilings in a long, familiar sigh. Tide rose slowly, came to the bed, and placed his muzzle on Soren's hand. Soren sat there breathing hard, palm resting against the dog's warm head. He could get up, check the locks, count the windows, touch the stove, step onto the porch and prove the world had not changed in the last 10 seconds. The urge was powerful. It was also not an order. Soren closed his eyes. 4 in, hold, 6 out. Tide stayed. The bell outside tapped once in the wind, cracked and low. Soren did not stand. Morning came pale and bright over Blackwood Marsh. The last of the thin snow melted from the roof in silver drops. Sunlight touched the repaired porch rail, the scarred bell, the new boards beside the old ones. Down by the canal, neighbors moved along their docks with coffee mugs and tool belts, calling across the water about records, repairs, and whether Amos had stolen somebody's level again. Soren opened the front door before anyone knocked. Tide stepped onto the porch beside him, ears forward, bandaged paw careful but steady. No one below called Soren a hero. Rosalind only pointed at the unfinished railing and said, "You planning to supervise all day? Or can that famous police shoulder still hold a board?" Amos laughed from the dock. Nia, standing near a stack of folders on the steps, shook her head as if the whole marsh was a badly managed meeting she had somehow agreed to chair. Soren looked at the black water. It moved under the house, neither friend nor enemy, carrying light where it could. For years he had treated home like a position to defend. Now, with Tide at his side and voices rising from the docks, it felt like something harder, a place to return to. He stepped down from the porch and reached for the waiting board. Sometimes, the miracle is not that everything broken becomes new overnight. Sometimes, the miracle is that we find the strength to stay, to rebuild one board at a time, and to let love back into the places fear once locked shut. This story reminds us that truth may move slowly, but it still moves. And even after loss, God can send quiet grace through a loyal friend, a steady hand, or a community willing to stand together again. May you find peace in the places you are rebuilding. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And please subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and hope.